Hello, welcome back to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin, and today we're diving into something that is very personal to me. Ni de aquí, ni de allá, neither from here nor there. If you grew up between cultures like I did, if you were born in the US but your parents are immigrants, or if you ever felt like you just didn't fully belong anywhere, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. This episode is for the first generation kids who translated at the doctor's office, translated papers when they arrived at the house, helped order food for your family, and for the ones who were told you're too American when visiting family in Mexico, and you're too Mexican when hanging out with friends here. For those who heard, your Spanish isn't perfect, or wow, you speak English so well, like it's a surprise. So this episode is for you. Today I'm going to get personal. I'm going to share my story, how it affected me and my mental health, and how we can learn to feel proud of being neither from here nor from there. So you already know, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, your beer, and get comfy because we're about to chisme up. First, let's start with my story, because this podcast is about speaking the truth, sin pelos en la lengua, I'd say. And that's what I always do. So like I mentioned in the last episode, I was born here in the US in a small suburb about an hour and a half from Chicago, I'd say, called Elgin. But my roots and my heart, they're from Mexico. Both of my parents are Mexican, from Puebla and Mexico City, and they brought with them their language, their traditions, their music, their faith, their food, literally everything that makes our culture so rich. And growing up, my house was basically, I always called it a little piece of Mexico because we always had the telenovelas with Fernando Colunga. He's a Mexican actor. And who else got woken up on a Saturday morning around 7:30? Because I definitely did. My mom decided that she wanted to clean at that time and she wanted to jam to Los Angeles Azules or Los Temerarios, their Mexican bands, playing music so loud. And I'm like, I just want to sleep in, mom. And there was always that time that she wanted to cook with spicy chile. And then all that air in the house was making me cough. And it literally blurred my vision because it was so spicy. But to me, that was my normal. But the thing is that once I stepped outside of my house and actually went to school, I entered a completely different world. And I was like, oh my, like, what is all of this? And I even remember sometimes my mom would pack me like leftover food, like pozole or caldo de pollo, kind of like chicken soup, in a thermo for lunch. And I loved it because if you know me, I love Mexican food. It's all I eat, and I will never get tired of it. But then I'd always get weird looks, and kids would say something like, what's that smell? Or what is that? That looks weird. So then eventually I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to eat school lunch. I'm going to eat the pizza, the cheeseburgers, because I just didn't want to feel different. And I even told my mom, you know what, mom? No more leftovers, eh? Like, yeah, no. And since I was little, I always also traveled to Mexico at least once a year in the summer break. And I always loved going because I was able to see my grandma, my uncles, my cousins. And I always knew that as soon as I would get to Mexico, I'd get to eat tacos al pastor at the corner stand with salsa and its piña, the pineapple. And that was definitely something that I always loved. But I also knew that I was probably gonna hear fireworks at midnight for no reason. And no, it did not have to be 4th of July. Or I would hear the tortilla guy or the gas truck pass by. And then I would also even hear the neighbor blast this music like at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. And guess what? Turns out there was a whole party that night. But then I'd always notice the difference between Mexico and the US. In Mexico, we get to go to the tianguis to get our groceries. And then vendors would say something like, Pásale, güerita, what do you need? What can I get you? And then here in the US, I'd walk into Walmart and not even a hello. And I was like, all of this is so different. In Mexico, we always greet each other. In every corner, someone knows you. And then here, I'd come home and not know a single neighbor. Mexico always has that human warmth, I'd say. But in the US, I also had privileges like having a car to get around. In Mexico, I had to take the microbus or the metro in La Ciudad de Mexico in Mexico City. So it was wild seeing the contrast, I would say, and then having to come back to normal life. But even though I loved being in Mexico, I still felt a little out of place because I had family who would call me la americana or la gringuita. And I know that sometimes they were joking, but then I feel like sometimes they were not because my Spanish is good, but it's not perfect. And I feel like I do have an accent, and that's what sometimes gives it away. And then I would say my clothes were different. And I remember there were times that I would go to Mexico and I was even asked to change my clothes. And they'd say, you have to change, would fit in better if you did. And I remember thinking, like, what's wrong with my outfit? I'm literally just wearing jeans, a shirt, and some sneakers. And to me, I felt like I looked like everybody else, but I guess I didn't. So it did make me feel like I just wasn't enough, not for either side. Then I'd go back to the US after summer break, and then I wasn't American enough either. And for whatever reason, my teachers always messed up my last name. So my last name is Lomelin, and the teachers would always say like Lomain, Lomelin, and I'm like, come on, it's not that hard to pronounce. And I already knew whenever we had substitute teachers, I knew they were gonna mess it up so bad. And then I even had teachers or even students that would say something like, wow, your English is so good. And I think like, why are you so surprised? So definitely I've been living in between two worlds since I was a kid. And back then, I guess I just didn't have the words for it. But now I do. And it's neither from here nor from there. Ni de aquí ni de allá. And that's why I named this episode this way. And I know that this feeling isn't just mine. I feel like it's the story of many. Children of immigrants, first generation people, folks raised between two different worlds. I feel like we're constantly shifting depending on, who we're with. We have to adjust how we talk, maybe how we act, even how we dress ourselves, or even how just we present ourselves with others. But at home, I always spoke Spanish. Up until the day, this is the language that we speak. And we celebrated our traditions. For example, you can celebrate El Dia de los Muertos with an ofrenda to remember the loved ones. But here in the US, you celebrate Halloween. And it's more about costumes and partying and all that fun stuff. But then at school or work, you have to switch back to English and then use American references. And then you're constantly trying to fit in and go back and forth. But I always, for whatever reason, I always felt pressure from both sides. Because I felt like in my parents' culture, I felt like I had to prove that I was Mexican enough. Like I had to know, I don't know, certain dates, slang, or customs. And if not, I'd hear something like, oh, now you think you're all American. And I also remember translating things from English to Spanish since I was around, I'd say like 8. And I remember that, I'd mess up things or I just didn't know how to translate it. And people would say things like, and why did you even go to school for? Shouldn't you know this? And I'd be like, man, can I have a second? Like, hold up, like, let me search it. Like, I don't know. But at the same time, I also felt pressure to prove I was American enough to belong, that I spoke well, that I understood, and didn't have too much of an accent. And oh my God, if I had $1 for every time someone told me, Jessica, your accent is so cute, I'd be rich. I'm serious. And honestly, I would just laugh like, is that supposed to be a compliment? And eventually, I just stopped reacting because I was like, I'm used to it. It's not a surprise. And up until this day, I'd say maybe like last month somebody said something like that, like, oh, your accent is so cute. And I don't know. It's just so exhausting because I just had that pressure to prove that I was enough to claim my culture, enough to represent my roots. And I feel like society is also always asking you, like, where are you from? And then you'd say, like, well, I was born here. And then they ask you again, no, but like, really, where are you from? And I'm like, I'm from here. Is that not good enough of an answer? Like, what else do you want me to say? And
I felt it even more in professional spaces, especially when I started working in social work or even when I got my education at school. I felt like I was the only Mexican American woman in the class, the only one with an accent. And anytime something came up about Mexico, people turned around and they were like, Jessica, you probably know this, right? What do you think? And I'm like, dude, like, why me? Like, am I the expert? Like, what? And over time, that just made me feel really small. I felt like I had to shrink or work twice as hard just to fit in. And I remember that, like, after summer break, you'd come back to school and teachers would always ask you, like, share with the other students, what did you do over summer break? And in my head, I'm like, I'm so excited to let them know that I went to dance with my cousins and listened to like banda, fed my grandma's chickens and pigs. But then I'm like, wait, no, you can't say that. They're gonna look at you weird, Jessica. So instead, play it on the safe side. I'd say something simple like, oh, yeah, my summer break was good. I went to the beach or I hung out with friends because I was like, are they even going to understand? And honestly, I just wanted to avoid any questions, any awkward moment. And I was like, I'm just going to keep it simple. But I feel like a lot of people might relate to that. And there's this writer named Gloria Ansaldúa who wrote a book called Borderlands, La Frontera. And she talks about this exactly. She talks about that feeling of being stuck between worlds. And she calls it Nepantla. And she says that it's a space where you're like not fully one thing or the other. And I honestly feel like a lot of us live there every day. But there's something I've also realized that no, we're already whole. Yeah, the identity struggle is real. Yeah, I get it. But I also say that it's beautiful. I belong to more than one world. And at least to me, that's powerful. And yeah, people ask me, like, so what does it feel like to be from two places? And I say, well, being neither from here nor from there, no, it's not just a pretty phrase. It can definitely hurt. And I definitely carried a lot of guilt. I felt guilty for feeling like I wasn't honoring my parents' culture enough. I also felt guilty because there were certain words that sometimes I forget in Spanish. Or I also felt guilty because I wasn't visiting Mexico enough. And you can never please people, but people always made comments like, oh, she's too good to come back, huh? That's why she's not coming to visit. And I'm like, no, like literally, I'm just busy with work, with school, or whatever it was. It's not that I don't want to, I just couldn't. But people always talk. But then at the same time, I also felt shame for not being American enough. And as you know, learning English was very hard for me. And up until this day, there are still words I can't pronounce right. And sometimes I can be talking to someone and they might reference some pop culture thing, and I'm like, wait, what? Like, I have literally this blank face and I have no idea what show or what actor they're talking about. And more than once, I've been reading or having a conversation, and then someone might drop like this fancy English word, and I'm like, what the heck is that? So, I'll bust out my phone and I'll Google it real quick just to know what they're talking about. And I also do think in Spanish first, and I've had this conversation with a lot of friends and colleagues that I feel like sometimes people can ask me something, or I might be reading something, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't click until I translate it in my head. And I'd say that most people who only grew up speaking English don't have to do that. So it always felt like I had one extra step, and that was very tiring. And sometimes I even said, it's not fair. Like, why do I have to do all of this? And I'd say that, I don't know, it just made me feel like I just didn't fit anywhere. And I'd call it like, or describe it kind of like I was floating, if that makes any sense. Because it was just a feeling that I just didn't know how to explain. But that feeling just, it didn't stay in my childhood. It literally followed me. And it definitely affected how I navigate work, my relationships, how I see myself, even how I picture myself as a mom someday. I've always said if I have kids one day, I want them to speak both Spanish and English and to know and love our Mexican culture. And for years, I thought I had to choose to either be more Mexican or be more American. But the truth is, I realized that I don't have to choose either one. Like, why should I? Because being neither from here nor from there, it's not a weakness. To me, at least, it's a superpower because I feel like it makes me so unique, and that's literally what makes Jessica. So for a long time, though, I didn't see it that way. I always felt like I wasn't Mexican enough or American enough. But now I can proudly say I am both. I carry both cultures, both worlds in my heart, and I've learned that I don't have to be ashamed of anything. In fact, it's something that I'm really, really proud of. Because being in the middle means I have two perspectives, two histories, two languages, and just overall two ways of seeing the world. And now I see myself as a bridge because I feel like I can translate, I can connect, and help others understand. And I carry the wisdom of my ancestors in my own life experience. So, yes, I can definitely eat tamales and tacos on Christmas and still wear an ugly Christmas sweater from Target because both can be true. And I think some of the things that have helped me with this is reconnecting a lot with my roots. And not because I have to or I'm being forced to, because that's not it, but genuinely because I want to. And I'd always ask my parents about their childhoods and like our culture, our traditions, our family back home. And I can sing along to Juan Gabriel and Bronco, even if I mess up half the lyrics. And you know what? That's okay. But I definitely found peace also by talking to other individuals who are first generation, by going to therapy, and just really putting any shame aside. So if you ever felt stuck between two different worlds, I want you to know this. You don't have to pick a side. You're not half of anything. You're actually double, I would say. Double the culture, double the strength, double the soul. We carry two worlds, and that is what makes us badass. Like, qué chingón that we can do that. So if you're listening to this and you ever felt neither from here nor from there, I want you to hear this too. No, you are not broken. And you're not failing either side. You are exactly who you're meant to be. And nope, you don't have to choose. You can create your own space, your own identity, and that's the beautiful part. So thank you for being here, for listening, for letting me share a little piece of my heart. But I also want to hear your stories too. So send me a DM, an email. I want this podcast to really be a community where we can share and heal together. So don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with someone who needs it. I will also be adding the link to the book I mentioned in the description of this episode. And remember, tune every Friday for a new episode. Next week's episode is called Lo que llevamos, what we carry. And I will just talk about literally what we carry, from the things that we inherited, the things we hold tightly, maybe the guilt, the pride, the culture, the joy, and the heaviness. So get ready. It's going to be a little messy, but very real. I'll be sharing personal stories, what I've inherited, what has shaped me, and overall, what I'm still trying to figure out to this day. Thank you for joining me on No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm Jessica Lomelin. Until next time.